Everybody, welcome to the architecture panel. One of the things we want to do here, and hopefully it says this in the program and you're here for the right thing, is recognize that there's what this framework says. And there's lots of great guidance in there, how to do an architectural runway, and that you need an architect in every triad, and that there's this thing called enterprise architecture that people might want to do somewhere. And yet, that's not enough to actually say in our enterprise, in the real world, what the heck do we actually have our architects doing, and what are the war stories from the field that make the difference? And one of my favorite things to do, having been a practicing solution architect for over a decade and then moving into change management, is I love to put architects on the spot with really good, tough questions that force them not just to say the platitudes or the framework says type answers, but to actually get down into no, let's actually figure out how to make this work in the real world and tell you where it doesn't work, what's really hard, and in a variety of really interesting enterprises, because we have a wide spectrum of history here, what actually happens with architects in times of change as we pursue agility. Does that sound like a good reason to be here for a little while? Great. So I'm going to start out with a handful of seeded questions. Actually, we're going to start out with them introducing themselves so you know who the heck they are, what their background is, and most importantly, what is the context from which they're answering the questions. Because if I go talk to somebody who's in a SaaS product app as a lead architect and they answer your question, and then I go talk to somebody who's deep in the government space and they answer your question, you better get different answers. Because if you don't, they're not very good architects, right? So we're going to have them introduce themselves. I'm going to ask a handful of seeded questions. And then as we're asking those questions, we'll start to feather yours in, both from the web, and if you just really want to get your voice out there, raise your hand, and we got a couple mics running around. All right, everybody ready to get started? All right, thank you. First off, I guess I should introduce myself. Eric Willicke, I'm a co-founder at Elevate. I'm a SAFE fellow, SBCT, and I have the dubious honor of having been the first subject matter expert to write the architect class for SAFE. I was a solution architect developer all that long time ago. At a certain point, I discovered that hacking people is a lot more fun than hacking systems. So these days, I focus on working with executives and shaping overall transformations, including getting to work with heads of enterprise architecture and people in those titles. So that's some of my fun work, but you're not here to talk about me. We're here to listen to these guys. Steve, why don't you kick it off?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Adolf. I'm an Agile coach with C Prime and an SBCT candidate. Hopefully we'll finish this year. My background is, my running joke on my bio is, if you remember TTL, Zilog Z80s, and Fortran, and PDP-11s, you're probably in my age demographic. I started my career developing call processing software for Class 5 digital exchanges, then got onto some really cool things like automated railway signaling. As I love to say, I got to play with the biggest electric train sets in cities. Around the mid-1990s, I crossed over to the dark side and into management, because one of the important things I began to realize, as Eric pointed, it was much more interesting hacking people than software, because it was the biggest cost driver and determinant of success in projects. So 2000, I started hanging out with these weird guys who eventually went off and wrote the Agile Manifesto. And a little bit background, 2010, I got working with Dean on something called the Scaled Agile Delivery Method at John Deere, along with my colleague here, Yvonne. That evolved into SAFE, and I haven't looked back since.
Great, thank you. Sorry, we're trying to get the overall timer going down here. Suresh.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Suresh Done. I'm the founder and chief architect of SNA Technologies. I've been in the industry for about 33 plus years, I would say. I've been an enterprise architect for more than 15 years. I started my career as a scientist in civil engineering, optimizing steel structures using AI techniques. This was back in 90s. Anybody heard of AI in 90s? Oh, okay, cool. There are a few hands here. Okay, so, and then after moving to US, I've been a consultant, IT consultant in various industries, telecom, banking, automotive. I live in Michigan, so I worked with all the big three companies. And I started my EA journey into the TOGAF. I train, coach, consult on TOGAF. I don't know if anyone here about TOGAF. I see Bharat here. So people who know about TOGAF probably know me. So I travel, I travel across the globe. So I run into many people whom I trained or coached most of the time. And I am also the chairperson for AEA, Enterprise Architects, Association of Enterprise Architects, Michigan chapter. So as a part of the Michigan chapter, we did some research on how to develop enterprise architecture, agile enterprise architecture. And we developed a methodology there, which after developing that, it's close to safe, if you will. So you see, great minds think alike. So I want to bring the enterprise architecture perspective to the panel. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. Joe.
Hey there. I'm Joe Blazak. I am the Director of Enterprise Architecture at T-Mobile USA, which is how my path crossed with Eric almost a year ago now. So I came to architecture through a very circuitous route. While I was getting my degree in biochemistry from the University of Arizona, I was working my way through college as a corporate trainer for Sears Catalog. Now I've just dated myself. But at some point, I decided that I could probably design a UX much better than the people that were designing the UX on green screen for all these little old ladies who were placing catalog orders on behalf of customers worldwide. So I fell into technology, ended up at a small startup at the time called America Online. Left, luckily, at the top of the .com, did a stint in government, replacing their old legacy mainframe systems for the Arizona General Jurisdiction and Arizona Supreme Courts. And that's where I started my architecture career. I did since remedy the degree problem, and not only do I have a master's in information technology, I also ended up picking a MBA along the way. Did a consulting stint and was hired initially on at T-Mobile about 10 years ago as a consultant, and then came up through enterprise architecture.
Great. Hi. Harry. Yeah. While you were, hi everyone, I'm Harry Kahneman, and while you were down in Tucson, I was up at NAU in Flagstaff getting my degree in computer science, in computer engineering. And so I started out as a software developer, software engineer. My first job out of college was at Intel. I started out in the embedded system space. I did some little Fortran, but I was doing Ada. Anybody heard of Ada before? We did an Ada runtime system for the F-22 microprocessor. It's called the i960MX back at the time. And then the .com era took off, so I got into Java and web service. The web was taking off, and did a bunch of work. I was the architect for the Cisco Network Academy. I did a bunch of architecture around the J2EE stack. Of course, that died a death, and I found myself back in government as well, doing more embedded stuff. Back in the 90s, though, modeling was a big thing, right? So we modeled our software, but we found out that modeling software doesn't really help accelerate it. In fact, it kind of slows it down. We iterate over software faster than we can iterate over the models. So, but modeling became cool because working with the government, we had to do system engineering. These are really big systems. We had to think about them up front. What were the requirements? What were the designs? We had to communicate to large sets of teams across many contractors. So we started, the modeling became very important to teach system engineers a better way of communicating. And we worked not TOGAF, but DODAF, an equivalent application framework. So I did that through the 2000s, worked a lot of system engineering, then got involved with more agile related things and wound up meeting Dean and helped develop Dean. I loved working with Dean because we took these ideas of, well, Dean, there's no requirements in design in here. That's a critical part of the solution. And so we had this little thing called requirements design compliance kind of in the bubble, which evolved into the what? Anybody know what that little icon of the framework became? Solution intent, exactly. Yeah, so that's where that Dean thinks abstractly like that, and it's really cool. So that's a little bit of my background and my bias. Oh, by the way, I should have mentioned I was going to introduce myself as Robin Yeaman, because Robin Yeaman, if you already know, Robin Yeaman from Lockheed Martin was supposed to be on the panel. So I am the government, compliance, big system representative for Robin. So we'll miss Robin, but she couldn't be here today.
Great, thank you all. You guys can hang on to the mic. Who wants to kick off with an easy question for them? Should we do easy questions? No, we're going to dive right into the fun ones. So first question or comment. We see, I think, in a lot of enterprises, the title of architect is actually more of an honorific. It's something where it's like, great, you're a tech lead, you're really smart, we want to recognize you for that, not actually treat it as a distinct skill set. Unfortunately, we get confusion, we get people that just aren't on the same page. And I want to baseline what we mean by architect before we even dive further into this conversation. So how many struggle with what is an architect as a question in your organizations? Great, hey guys. What is an architect in practice? And what do they spend their time doing? I think Steve has a great answer here. He's like doing that signal thing.
Yeah, I avoided doing this. I thought that might get people a little nervous. I think one of the big problems I see in a lot of clients is exactly that. The term architect is used as an honorific for someone who has subject matter expertise. And the challenge with that, it leads to thinking of architect strictly as a technical role. And therefore, the architect becomes what I would say is command and compliance. Thou shalt follow I will do the design, thou shalt follow my design, and then I will check up on you that you're following my design. Net result, they become a massive bottleneck, disconnected from their teams. I mean, I've seen organizations where the architect has to validate every story. Now you can imagine what kind of bottleneck that becomes. Reality is, in my view, the architect is another servant leader and change agent that is enabling people to have clarity into what the large-scale organization of their system is, such that they can make decisions quickly. In other words, enabling people to delegate those decisions to the teams, much in the same way. For example, a product manager can delegate to a PM. So RTE delegates to the Scrum Masters.
Joe, I think you chair an Enterprise Architecture Council. What do you think about this?
I do. So I have a team of about 40 architects. We split them between enterprise architecture and complex solution architecture. And I actually rotate my team through enterprise and solution back and forth. So they always have their hand in the weeds, so to speak. My chief requirement for anybody that I hire or anybody that I bring onto the team is they are the supreme negotiator. The line that I will steal from Eric is a group of architects is called an argument of architects. And it is true. They are the ones that need to sit down, resolve the arguments, not only between the technology people, but between business people. I'm sure all of you have taken a look at two different business requirements and said, you know what, these guys don't jive. And now you have to force the business conversation to figure out even what architecture you're building from.
Let's get one more definition. Suresh, you want this?
All right. Day before yesterday, at the breakfast, we ran into one lady. She was saying that we hired a bunch of architects and they are living in that ivory tower. We don't know what they are doing. Probably she is referring to enterprise architects, maybe not solution architects, because solution architects are okay. They are hands-on, they do the work. But enterprise architects, people think that they don't do the work. Well, a lighthearted answer is they are not living in the ivory tower. They are hiding in the bunkers. Because, you people have a lot of questions for them. They want all the answers. They think that they're omniscient, they know everything, and they are, psychic, they know the future, right? So they come and ask you, what's going to happen, or what do I do for this? So, I would say, I'm talking about enterprise architect only here, not solution architect. So enterprise architect is a cross-functional role, right? So you have to touch with various disciplines, various roles to perform your role, right? So you, and as an enterprise architect, you do a lot of things, right? So you establish the vision, curate a roadmap, right? And then you foster innovation within the organizations. So there are a lot of things that enterprise architects do, and it goes unknown, right? So nobody knows what to do.
Great, thank you. So, just as a reminder, if you want to put your questions in through the app, I will start seeing them. Adam, thank you for starting to see the questions. We'll come back to that in just a moment. But I'm going to ask one more question. How many of you are familiar with the book Team Topologies? Great, perfect room for this question then. We've seen a lot of focus on the implications of Conway's Law over the last couple of years. And Team Topologies is kind of the book that brings it really to the forefront and talks about it and gives us the visual language. What have you seen this doing in practice? Well, how is it actually being used? How do you see architects engaging in the conversations around org design, given that Conway's Law is a thing? Harry, you haven't spoken much yet. Go for it.
It's my turn, right? Back on the thing. Yeah, so of course, I think we all know that, right? As Conway tells us, right? The communication channels of the organization, we need to organize around those. So we need to understand our intentional architecture, right? The future state architecture. What's that architecture going to look like in the future? And that's the thing we need to organize around. And that plays a critical role. And I've seen that in many organizations where we haven't considered the future state architecture. We've organized around the wrong way. And you can get there, but it actually slows development, slows delivery, creates a lot more cross dependencies. So really the goal is understanding what that future state architecture is. And it really, in my experience with engineering organizations, seem like they understand it more, right? They're more system engineering led. We thought about what the system's going to look like up front. And contracts were let out to go build components or build capabilities. It's really when I've done consulting in other organizations that don't have as strong of an architectural function, it's those organizations that usually suffer the most, in my experience.
Great. Well, you're dealing with this in reality day to day right now. What do you think?
I am dealing with it in reality. I would say from a org design standpoint, very rarely do I see architects or enterprise architects actually at the table doing the actual org design. Where I see the greatest amount of influence is what I call planting seeds, and planting seeds with key leaders, saying, hey, if we group this function and this function together under the same leader, we can get an economy of scale here. So you're not directly, or at least in my experience, I'm not directly saying, let's move this name in this box and take this team and move it under this leader, but it's the planting the seeds, that becoming the trusted advisor to the leadership in the organization, and watching those seeds grow fruit.
Great, thank you. Room monitors, the live view of the audience questions just died on me, 503 unavailable, so hopefully that sorts itself and you can help out. But meanwhile, we're going to go back to the list. How many of you seen an us versus them between architects and the business? Remember when that was actually in the framework? There was a slide in the classes for that? Yeah, I don't think we think that's a good thing. Did you now? No. So why don't we just jump there? How do you see it playing out in practice, and how do we wire down that mindset, Harry?
So there was some strong, again, I'm representing the engineering side, less the IT side. So my experience is that it's relatively straightforward to get a product manager and the system engineer architects to have the conversations, because in engineer organizations, they usually come from very similar backgrounds. So the language used to be that, hey, the recommendation was, hey, let's have certain capacity for enablers, certain capacity for features. And in my experience, WSGIF is always a great, every agile event is really around a conversation, right? Creating space for that conversation, face-to-face conversation. And usually the conversation, the dialogue creates that understanding and that empathy for each other's needs and goals. So where that fails, yes, we can move to the capacity allocation. So certainly we used to subscribe a little more strongly that, hey, separate those two, but we hopefully now, WSGIF and the conversation should get us to prioritize the work and less need for the capacity allocation.
All right, just let me give my 2 cents. So now this, as an architect, you have to know the business. There is, technology comes after the business, right? So without having the business knowledge, it's difficult to be an architect nowadays.
And it's also really important to have that collaborative relationship with the business because unfortunately, some clients I've seen almost a combative relationship where the architect or the designated architect is battling for control of the backlog with the product owner. And sometimes even bullying the product owner because they don't have the knowledge of the business. And it really is, your role as an architect is, how do I help guide you to have a successful outcome from this? In the end, this is not about creating gorgeous, beautiful architectures. This is about creating successful business outcomes.
Great, thank you. Apologize for the tech support activities going on. So one more seated question before we have any good audience ones here? Yeah, sweet. Let's jump into Catherine's. I haven't even looked at it yet. So how are cross-cutting architecture items prioritized in work, things like platform components, framework decisions, and recreation, defining and deciding on best practices and patterns, common tooling? What art events should architects even attend? Let's take a shot at that.
There was a lot to unpack in there. Let me take a stab at some of the things that we do. We will typically come up with a focus area or several focus areas for a particular quarter or sometimes a half a year that we will ask most of our applications to review, for example, their resiliency requirements and our patterns around resiliency. And then we will fund their work to bring their application stack up to the new standards. So that's one way that we're able to filter down changing and involving principles and patterns from the enterprise level down into the individual applications. Somebody want to
All right. So I think that in the question there is about some reference architectures, patterns, and all right. Okay. So now frameworks are there, patterns, reference architectures. These are all good, but as an architect, you need to know how to customize those, right, to fit the organization needs. If you don't know that, you're lost. Okay.
And ideally, a lot of those ideas become executable, right? We're not just handing a spec to people; we're handing them actually components and things that they could reuse. Sometimes those are developed by there's a messaging team or even a messaging art, right? That's going to build infrastructure or platform services. And when it's cross-cutting, right? Then what's nice about it, grouping that into its own backlog of work. Well, then you get all the stakeholders, as we talked about before, with WSGIF, right? We can prioritize the work. There's a set of consumers of that work. Everybody's items have a customer. But this development value stream now, since the platform is really servicing other customers, and we empathize with how those customers are going to consume it, and how is it going to be, an API used, or is it going to be embedded somehow? So, I lost the question. That's okay. That's okay. Anyway, so I think from the cross-cutting perspective, a lot of times we can pull that out, make it its own entity. We can leave it embedded, make it cross-cutting, but there's other models of how we can architect or organize around value of that kind of delivery that we should consider.
Great. I'm going to jump to Ian's question next. I don't know if you guys can push that into the screen or not, but it's a phenomenal one, and I appreciate Ian for asking it. In the role of architect, how can you maximize the amount of work not done?
I think one of the things you want to be able to do is, again, look at what the value of this enabler is going to be, or the work. Because the one thing I've noticed, and sometimes I think this is why Agile came about, was because we had a wonderful desire to totally gold plate our systems. And so I think one of the first things to maximize that is to actually start the early validation of our architecture. Because I remember some of the systems I worked on, we actually would probably spend 80% of our project budget on building our beautiful framework and reusable components. And then it was like, oh my God, we're going to deliver late. And then we discovered the architecture didn't work. It was performance issues, security issues. So it really is, I think, one of the first things is quickly validating that architecture, actually testing it.
I was just going to add to that. I agree. I was going to say the same thing. The notion of we have that built in, right? It's in our DNA. Do MVPs, validate things early. But I think also architects in general maximize the amount of work not done, right? If you validate something early and make the right decision and use step-based design and keep your options open, we don't get to the point where we have teams building on things that are going to have to change, right? So architects maximize work not being done because we make decisions before it actually gets to the teams, and a lot of rework has to occur.
One more. Everybody wants to talk.
The question that I always ask the business, really freaks them out, is what are your KPIs and how are you going to measure success? So how are you going to be measured on this product? And then we have the discussion around what's the minimal thing that can be delivered to affect that metric. And sometimes you get surprised how many products actually don't have business cases behind them. So it's a really fun game for the architects in the room to play.
One more. Why don't we let everybody answer this one?
Okay, so I told you that we developed Agile Enterprise Architecture methodology, right? So now there are different levels of architecture. We have enterprise architecture, we have portfolio architecture, solution, systems architecture, right? So how much enterprise architecture has to be done so that you can move to the portfolio level? How much portfolio architecture has to be done to move to the solution level and from solution to systems level? If you are able to do that, then you can maximize what the work now done.
Great. I think for the next question, I want to move to Emily's question because I talked about leadership teams yesterday. How do you see the collaboration between architects and product managers? How do you build that bridge and how do you get them to work together in a meaningful way?
I'll just go real quick. I think we slightly discussed that earlier, right? The tension. It's the having a common backlog and shared work for the teams and having the conversations that WizGIF and the face-to-face collaboration that occurs and understand and having an architecture runway to explain that without you have in your roadmap you have these features. We're not going to be able to build those features without this knowledge or this infrastructure or these other pieces in place. So the face-to-face conversation that Agile asks us to do, I think those are built into some of the practices that we do in Agile, like prioritization and WizGIF.
One more.
I'm going to paraphrase something that is attributed to Woody Guthrie, and he says, an engineer is somebody who can do for a dime what any damn fool can do for $1. And I think really that is what the architects bring. We have a product owner who says, this is what I need. The architect is, okay, here's what it's going to cost, here's what it's going to take to build this, and having that dialogue. But I think to really understand that there is as an architect, we really need to understand that there is an economic driver here. This is not about building grand, beautiful architectures, but how do we expediently meet, as you say, the KPIs for a product in an economic way.
So I'm going to actually take that as a great segue to the next question. How do you socialize the value new architecture will bring to the business in order to get prioritized and safe? How do you actually communicate the value of what you do out to the people who are paying for it ultimately?
By developing the minimum viable architecture.
This is where we put them on the spot, right?
Okay.
But serious question, how do you socialize that value? What are the techniques you use?
So basically, we have the business drivers, business goals, objectives, right? So you're mapping your architecture to those goals and objectives, right? And then see who are the stakeholders who are affected by that, by those, goals and objectives, and then socializing them, showing them what's the benefit, what's the value that the architecture would bring in.
From an enterprise perspective, you have to understand your business. You have to be in a good relationship with your business. You need to know what their strategy is. You need to have that roadmap as to how they're going to get there. Not only should your roadmap speak to what the strategy is, but also it should speak to unlocks. So what new lines of business can your architecture allow the company to move into that maybe they haven't thought about exploring? Or maybe they did think about exploring, in the past it was not economical. Maybe the cost-benefit analysis has now changed. So you really have to have that close working relationship to understand the key drivers of the business and to be able to directly relate your architecture to those key drivers.
So we're getting right up to the end of the questions, but there's one more good, challenging, esoteric question I'd like to hear your thoughts on. Should there be a role called organization architect, and why? Hi, Sammy, we love you.
Maybe.
Consultant speak.
It depends. Yeah, I would say that, if you look at the I'd say DODAF, you'd say TOGAF. That is one of the functions of enterprise architect, right? Is how we're going to organize to go deliver these things. So that is certainly what I want to say. The function of enterprise architect needs to address that concern, I would say. And would you agree with that?
Yes, I see those as synonymous, but the organization and enterprise, what's the difference, right? So our enterprise has a common goal, whereas organization doesn't have, right? So do you want to call them as organization architects? I doubt it.
All right, and I think we're going to go into our closing question. I really love putting architects on the spot. We're giving you 90 seconds to do an elevator pitch for the entire C-suite at your organization. Fortune 50, you've got your chief product officer, chief operating officer, everybody who matters. And you get this one shot to sell what needs to change to really unleash the impact of the architects of the organization. What do you say to that suite of executives in your elevator pitch? You've got that 90-second window.
Well, yeah, I guess I'll go first. I have the mic. I have the luxury of having worked in aerospace and defense and automotive organizations I mentioned before who are a little more systems engineering and architecture friendly, because most of those organizations are led by those people. So I think it'll be kind of a different answer than I think we heard from the other three folks. But all of us, in fact, it's interesting to watch automotive, right? That was always driven by mechanical and engines and how many horsepower can you put in things. Now they're software companies, right? So if you, and they're all wondering there's going to be honestly many brands that do not exist in automotive in the next 5 years that are namesakes for us, and new ones emerging. I just drove in a Rivian truck, the other day, that now they're the dominant electric truck vehicle. They surpassed, Tesla's still waiting, right? GM's got one out, but who would have thought that? It's a startup truck company. So the message then to the leaders is, there's other people innovating, right? That constant sense of danger. If you don't explore new technology and understand how that technology is going to fit inside of your system, whether it be electrification of the vehicle for batteries or autonomous driving, we won't be here, right? And that's true in any domain. And who's going to go do that exploration and stay aware of that technology in an organization? Development teams are too busy delivering. We want them to be busy delivering. So we need other people looking out there to see what technology exists and how's that going to be integrated into the solutions that we offer today and in the future.
All right. So as I said, I worked for the automotive companies. So in one of the automotive companies, back in the day, they said that, business, IT don't talk to business at all. So, you know how it went. So it didn't go far. So even though they did the architecture, initiative for about 5-6 years, nothing went well, and they have to scrap the whole architecture, right? And this happened not only in that kind of automotive, in many organizations. This happened because they started the architecture initiative, and then it was all IT focused, and then it fell off, right? Because because there was no business benefit coming out of it, right? They spent a whole lot of time in just collecting the information. So I would say, focus more on business, right? Train your architects on the business side rather than on the technology side. So once they are business savvy, probably they bring greater value to the IT side as well, right? So that's my pitch.
I would say shift your architecture as far left as possible in your planning process. We are most effective when we know what's going on and what is coming. So reactionary architecture is riddled with technical debt, and it will ultimately be more expensive to maintain and run, and will negatively impact your long-term ROI. Whereas if we're involved sooner and we understand what the business is trying to do and where the business is going, then we can solution more appropriately and more resiliently?
I think I would start with a question, and it's really based on, let's go to fundamentals here. What is Agile about? And we're assuming we're talking about agility, business agility, Agile architecture, and that is we're adopting Agile because we believe that we gain economic advantage by learning and deciding faster than our competitors. So the opening question would be, do our competitors surprise us or do we surprise them? And what role how quickly can we deploy strategy given our systems? How quickly can we change our policies? How quickly can we bring a new product out? Can we do that faster than our competitors? And if the answer is yes, then how do we get more of that? Starting to talk more about shifting left. If the answer is no, then from there, what are the impediments to us being able to quickly deploy strategy? What needs to change in the architecture? How can we speed up flow through the organization? The other dimension that I would look at is data. Where are our bottlenecks? How are we making decisions on what needs to change in our world here? Is it based on just expert judgment, or do we actually have data that can back up our decisions? So those would be the aspects of architecture I'd be most interested in.
Great. Thank you all. I really appreciate the answers, the willingness to be on the spot, and in most cases, the ability to nail the time box. We appreciate Maddie for trying to keep everybody into their answer segments. Thank you. And I thank all of you. We had more questions that we even start to get to, probably actually more than I could scroll through on the small screen I had. Who would like to see further answers to some of those questions? Enough of you? Great. There is a beautiful forum titled Safe Architects on the community site. I would invite you to continue the conversation there. I believe many or most of you should have access to that. Go in there, upload the questions. We might seed a couple of these. I might try to drag these guys in there and make them answer some questions over the coming days and weeks. It's a great opportunity just to get out there and keep the conversation going because, like I said, tons of great questions here. I literally can't even read them while I'm trying to keep an eye on what they're saying, or keep an ear on, as the case may be. So thank you for that. I would love to see you out in the forums. These guys will be around for a few minutes if you want to flock them and ask that one more question you just got to have the answer for. Otherwise, thank you all and have a phenomenal summit.